And with that, we bring on a sport we're crossing our fingers returns. Scott Boras, the founder, owner, president of the Boras Corporation, responsible for over $1 billion in baseball contracts. So, Scott, let's start with this. We have a economic reality of a 15% unemployment staring us in the face. And while we want baseball back, it did feel to me, just my opinion, a little unseemly talking about billionaires and millionaires and revenue sharing. Are you at all concerned that that stuff goes public and the optics aren't great on that discussion publicly now?
Well, good afternoon, Colin. I hope you and your family and your staff are well. The players really, and Tony Clark and the Major League Baseball Players Association, they kind of rolled up their sleeves in March because we wanted to avoid this very issue. And the Major League Baseball approached the union and the players, and certainly with the strong support of the players I represent, they reached an accord. They reached an agreement as to how they would handle the 2020 season. And that was a major compromise because players really agreed to a 30 to 50% salary cut by doing so. But really, in light of the public health issue and creating a harmony to go forward, that agreement was reached in late March, and it's something that we're. And as Tony Clark has stated, and certainly with the support of the players I represent, that agreement is operative and what we will work off of in going forward in the 2020 season.
But the owners now are pushing back on that. And explain to my audience what the owners want now, because they initially agreed to that knowing there's not going to be any fans. The owners said, we get it. They accepted your initial proposal. Your clients did. But now the owners are pushing back. Explain where they're pushing back that you're not comfortable with.
Well, in the agreement, there are dynamics that allow for considerations and good faith discussion between the union and the players and the owners about they anticipated playing without fans. They anticipated playing in neutral sites. All these things were the same condition. Matter of fact, the pandemic may have been worse considerations because of the unknowns in March than it is today. So all those dynamics were looked at, and there's provisions in the agreement that allow for evaluative processes to determine whether or not games can be played. And so this is something that's all within the confines of the agreement. Now, in fairness, there's been a lot of speculation about plans and such that I am told from the players and from the union that those have not been presented. They're just been early discussions. I think any attempt to privatize the gains and socialize the losses, if you will, is that we have to look at Major League Baseball and look at it in the last 10 years and say, the Atlanta Braves were bought for $450 million. They're now worth $1.8 billion. The Cleveland Indians were purchased for $323 million. They're now worth, $1.1 billion. If the Atlanta Braves revenues are public because they're a publicly owned company, in 2016 they had roughly $262 million in revenues. Last year they had $476 million in revenues, a $215 million gain. And when you're a business owner, as am I, you have situations in your business that are upstart, and there are situations that are difficult. And you certainly don't go to your salaried employees and expect them to basically spread the losses during bad years alone, but not participate in the gains. So I think that concept is something that by general aspects, we've got to look at. Major League Baseball is very, very successful. We're having a difficult year because of the pandemic, and the players have compromised by reducing their salaries dramatically and the number of games they play to accommodate them. And I think it's something that when we look at how we harmonize the public health issue and the need to function. I think the players in the union have appropriately reached out and accommodated early in this process to avoid any issues.
Could I make the argument that because of the scarcity of sports, if you watch UFC last weekend, the most bet card, one of the most viewed cards, we have such scarcity that baseball coming back, I could certainly argue baseball over the last 15 years of my life has lost a little bit of social water cooler currency in my space, the opinion space on sports networks. That with a scarcity, if baseball came back, you gave up a few more things, the value for the sport going forward would outweigh losses in the short term. There is a macro view here that baseball could be a discussion point in America, nothing else on the table, and that it's worth losing a little bit day-to-day in negotiations for a short time, 1 year.
I think your point is very well stated, Colin, and appropriate and accurate. You'd have to ask, what would a league really pay or subsidize to have their sport on television by itself,
yes,
essentially, and have everyone, that new generation, everyone watch it. Remember, we're with the pandemic, our goal is to keep people isolated, to keep people at home, and have a reason for them to stay at home because they want to watch fresh content. I live in Los Angeles, and there are about 800,000 people in the industry of creating content that are not working. And there will not be fresh content for a while because of that. And so providing Major League Baseball, you may have it on prime time at nights because the fact is that the audience will want to see something that is new and real and normalizing and part of the American way of life. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the game to advance itself and also provide, in effect, a new level of interest among a group of fans that they did not reach prior to the pandemic.
Scott Boras joining us. You would obviously, in your world, the players should do less sacrificing than baseball as a whole to do that, which, of course, a sport always has more capital than individual players or agents, and I'm not going to debate that. I do wonder, getting past the financial issues, with your clients, is health still a concern, Scott, or are they looking at data points with this pandemic where professional athletes perhaps are the safest people? If you could weigh in on players' concerns about health and also one or two centralized locations, is that still a pushback? Players don't want to be away from their families for 6 months. So let's talk health, number one, and number two, centralized location.
Certainly, we've been fortunate. I studied pharmacology prior to becoming a lawyer, but you learn from medicine about models, and you learn that if you have models, you can work off them and you can learn a great deal from them. And the one thing we know from the medical professionals that have had a chance to address and speak to the players I represent is that the age of is very, very important in this pandemic and treatment of the virus. Is that first class physical condition is very important. Having no underlying medical conditions, being tested daily is important. And we found that they did a study in baseball with Stanford and USC where, because of the isolation of spring training and right thereafter they did the study, and the incidence of people with the virus was well less than 1%. And that was some players and some administrative people. So we know that the isolation aspect and being in a smaller group and being around, of going to and from the ballpark, we know that those things are helpful because obviously you're not in the general population anywhere near as much as you would maybe be by going to the grocery store.
Right.
So the other thing we have is that we have Taiwan, Korea, Japan. We have soccer teams, the Bundesliga. We have many, many models that have been operating for 60 to 90 days, and we've gotten a lot of information about what they're doing and how they've done it. And again, we've had a survival rate of 100%. We've had few, if any, hospitalizations. And so we've had to isolate players who've gotten the virus. But essentially, we're seeing, as far as jurisdictions, Arizona is now allowing for sports teams to work out in their area as long as there's no fans. And so this virus is certainly jurisdictional. It has different impacts in different areas. And I think in professional sports, we can adjust to that and really look at this day to day. And really, we have to create a harmony. We have to create a harmony between the public health issue needs and also the need for function to mitigate the social detriments of the health issue. And, mental health, isolation, people working, the economy, all of this have to be a common approach. And I know the baseball players I represent is that they've received enough medical information. They've got it from the professionals. They know that there's varied opinions. And but on the other side, I think with their age group and what they know and the fact that they're going to get medical treatment at their facilities daily and be tested daily or so if often, I think they're certainly comfortable with continuing.
If I said to you, June 1st, spring training starts, June 1st, 2.5 weeks from now, realistic or unrealistic?
Well, those decisions, of course, really relate to the Players Union and MLB and the players themselves. But my feeling, Colin, is that when you're around elite athletes your whole life and you're around people that are extraordinary at what they do, their routines and what they do are very, very important. And we've had an unusual interruption, unlike any time. People have talked about when players didn't play during strikes, but players were out working out. They were doing things normally. They were around players playing catch, throwing, doing their routine activities. In this situation, players have been removed because they've been isolated. So for me, I believe we need more time for spring training. We need a conditioning part of this, and we need more for these players to get their conditioning levels to a point, and before they even begin their skill dynamic. And I'm hoping that whatever date that is, and I'm hoping it is June 1st, but the earlier the better, I think, to get these players more time so they can return to a performance level that they had prior to the pandemic.
Are your clients working out right now, even at home?
Oh, yes. We have a Sport Fitness Institute. We have our own training staff in our company, and we monitor what our players are doing weekly. We have recorded what their practices were prior to the pandemic, and we're trying to do our best to simulate what they were doing, through this. But obviously, now it's with states opening up and things, it's much easier for them to get out and do more normal things prior to spring training.
Yeah. Where's your institute at, by the way, Scott?
We have two of them, actually. We have one in California and one in Florida. And our main offices, of course, are here in Newport Beach.
All right. Good stuff, Scott Boras. Thank you for your time today and your patience with this stuff. I think I've never wanted to watch a Angels game more in my life, a Dodger game more in my life. So we're all rooting for it to happen, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And I think your point about sport being something about what America needs, and it's normalcy. And I hope that all of us are working collectively to reach a resolve on this, but understand this is not going away, but our resolve shouldn't go away either.
Good stuff. Thank you, Scott. Good stuff, Scott Boras. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's always easy to just say it's just sports.